Namaste, a wonderful day to all of you. This is Professor Ajit Jaiswal, Head Department of Anthropology. Let's start discussing the 37th lecture of a lecture series on Indigenous Knowledge System from the Earth for the Future. Today, I will discuss on threat to Indigenous Knowledge System. If you remember in the last class or in the previous lecture, we discussed about contribution of Indigenous Knowledge System to biodiversity conservation. And in that, we clearly discussed about series of key factors like traditional ecological knowledge, sustainable resource management practices, community-based conservation initiative, sacred groups and traditional protected areas, seed sovereignty and crop diversity, ecosystem restoration and regeneration, legal recognition of indigenous rights, and so on. If you have missed that lecture, then you can see the link given over here. Not only that, there are series of lectures. As I told you, this is the 37th lecture of a lecture series. If you miss any one of them, you can go through the link. You will find the detailed analysis of indigenous knowledge system. You know this thing. This is the era of Bharatiya Gyan Parampara. And we have to understand, we have to give importance, we have to realize its value. Now the Western world, throughout the world, complete world is dependent on the indigenous knowledge system. We too have to start thinking in that manner. And all this lecture series will be highly useful to increase the horizon of your understanding, increase the vision of your representation, and ultimately that will be highly useful for series of competitive examination. We have seen that this is an important and very paid question for most of the competitive examination. Let it be UPSC, let it be UGC, let it be NET, let it be any as such state or central public service commission. This is the pet question where people used to ask a series of questions related to that. Now let's start discussing another important information. If you have any doubt or any question related to any area of anthropology or related to the existing series of lecture concerns, then you can ask through the comment section. Hit that like button and subscribe for more important video related to anthropology. Now let's start threat to indigenous knowledge system. Indigenous knowledge system face various threats that endanger their preservation, transmission and continued relevance. This threat arises from a combination of social, economic, environmental and political factors, often rooted in historical justice, injustice and ongoing processes of colonization, globalization and cultural marginalization. Now let's see the key threat to indigenous knowledge system. First one is colonialism and cultural suppression. Second is land dispossession and environmental degradation. Third is loss of language and oral tradition. Fourth is globalization and westernization. Fifth is intellectual property rights and biopiracy. Sixth is cultural stigma and discrimination. Seventh is climate change and environmental disaster. So these are the 7 key areas that we'll discuss one by one. Let's start the first one, that is colonialism and cultural suppression. Historical process of colonization and cultural suppression have undermined the indigenous knowledge system by imposing Western ideologies, values and institutions that devalue indigenous culture, indigenous language and indigenous tradition. Colonization often resulted in the marginalization of indigenous people, loss of land and resources, forced assimilation and disruption of traditional knowledge transmission mechanisms. If you see series of tribal movement, it is the result of that only. That is very important topic in the field of anthropology, especially for the competitive examination concern. Next is land dispossession and environmental degradation. Indigenous peoples and traditional territories, which serve as a primary context for the development and transmission of indigenous knowledge system, are increasingly threatened by land dispossession, resource extraction, deforestation, mining, industrial agriculture and infrastructural development. Environmental degradation undermine indigenous livelihood, cultural practices and ecological knowledge, disrupting the continuity of traditional knowledge and transmission. Third important is loss of language and oral tradition. Indigenous languages serve as the primary medium for the transmitting traditional knowledge, transmitting cultural practices and spiritual beliefs. However, many indigenous languages are endangered or face extinction due to the language shift, due to the cultural assimilation and government policies promoting dominant languages. The loss of indigenous languages contribute to the erosion of oral tradition, intergenerational knowledge transmission and cultural identity. The fourth important point is globalization and westernization. These two are very broad topic and very common topic, especially for the competitive examination in the anthropology field concern. Both have a distinct vision. Like globalization and westernization processes have introduced new cultural influence, economic system, consumer lifestyle, and technological advancement that challenges traditional way of life and knowledge system. Western education system, media and digital technology often prioritize Western perspective, Western languages and knowledge, marginalizing indigenous knowledge and worldview in mainstream discourse. Fifth point is the intellectual property right and biopiracy. Indigenous knowledge systems are vulnerable to exploitation and misappropriation through the unauthorized use, appropriation, and commercialization of traditional knowledge by external actors. Biopiracy in particular involves the theft of indigenous genetic resources, medicinal plant and traditional knowledge for commercial gain without any consent or benefit shared arrangement with indigenous communities. Sixth one is cultural stigma and discrimination. Indigenous knowledge and practices are sometimes stigmatized, denigrated, or dismissed as primitive, backward, or superstitious by mainstream society, by the government authority, or even within the indigenous community themselves. Discrimination and prejudice against indigenous people perpetuate social inequality, limit opportunity for cultural revitalization, and undermine the recognition of indigenous right and knowledge. Now, the seventh important point is climate change and environmental disaster. Climate change and environmental disaster and natural hazards pose a existential threat to indigenous community, their traditional territories, and the ecosystem on which their livelihood depend. So disruption to seasonal weather pattern, loss of biodiversity, habitat destruction, and extreme weather events exhibit vulnerabilities and challenge traditional coping mechanisms based on indigenous ecological knowledge. So we have seen that there are series of factors that lead to be or that known to be the key contributing factors or act as a threat to indigenous knowledge system. We have clearly discussed about the role of colonialism and cultural suppression, land disposition and environmental degradation, loss of language and oral tradition, globalization and westernization, intellectual property right and biopiracy, cultural stigma and discrimination, climate change and environmental disaster. Overall, we may say that addressing the threat to indigenous knowledge system require concerted effort to promote cultural revitalization, indigenous rights, environmental stewardship, and social justice. So, empowering indigenous community to assist their rights, protect their cultural heritage, and participate in decision-making processes is essential for safeguarding indigenous knowledge system and promote their resilience in the face of contemporary challenges. So that's all for today. These are the important points that explain the key issues of threat to indigenous knowledge systems. And important point, I just want to say you that if you have any doubt, any queries related to the present lecture or related to the last lecture, then you can ask through the comment section. One important information, a new video will come daily around 1 p.m. So keep your notification bell on. Thank you. That's all for today. Namaste.